So, Ed Rogers has a question. Said, should an 11-1 Michigan team make the playoffs along with a 13-0 Ohio team?
100%. 100% in my book. I mean, if you're talking, especially that one loss you're talking about is against Ohio State. I mean, and I like how Ed put Ohio State more in that favor of that question. But anyway, no, I mean, because you're talking about, Michigan essentially, that's a one-loss team. Um, their one loss is against an undefeated Ohio State team. And then also, one thing you guys got to recognize is that there aren't really, really a lot of really good teams in college football. There's a lot of good, but not like a lot of great teams. And I think that four spot, if you're a team like Michigan, you have the brand, you only have one loss. Yeah, you don't have this year. I don't get to worry about a non-power five, team like Cincinnati or something
Notre
ridiculous like
Dame.
that. Notre Dame, you have to worry about them getting that fourth spot. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's the type of year that Michigan, if they have that one loss, will get in at 11-1.
Here are the two potential hurdles or speed bumps, if you will. Is number one, and I know everyone's going to hate that I bring it up, is your out of conference schedule. Like
Right.
that's going to hurt. It may not be
Yeah.
it may not stop you from getting in, but that is going to hurt. The other is and I'll speak for myself here. I wasn't expecting USC to be here right now. Like I was expecting them already to have at least
Because
one
you
or two
don't, because you
losses.
don't believe in Lincoln Riley, and I told you, trust in Lincoln, man. But you have your beef with Lincoln Riley, and I don't know what else. You need counseling. I don't know what it is, but you
Well,
see what's happened to Oklahoma since he's left. So they're getting popped by TCU
oh,
by 31
hold on, hold
points
on,
and
hold
stuff
on,
like that.
hold on. Has
Granted,
that never
Gabriel got
happened
hurt.
under Lincoln Riley?
I'm
What
just,
happened to Oklahoma? Has
I'm
that
just
never happened
saying.
to Lincoln Riley?
I'm just saying.
And then also, how many guys left out of the portal and went to the NFL from Oklahoma? So let's relax on that.
Okay.
Anywho, USC is undefeated, and I think they're a bit ranked higher than what I think they should be. But
Of
nonetheless,
course.
if they're undefeated, they are absolutely getting in. Now that's not a foregone conclusion,
But they're
but
undefeated. That means that they would have won their conference. Of course, they're getting in. I mean, like,
but
look,
here's the thing too. Let's say and the way the Pac-12 is even a one-loss team, right? They don't have divisions, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's just the top two teams are going to get in, if I'm
correct.
not mistaken. I might be wrong in that, but I even a one-loss USC team, if they win the conference, I think they would be in over Michigan, and that's not a team that before the season started that I had potentially even making the playoff.
Yeah, yeah. I can see that, but like, here's the thing. Um, I think yeah. I think you have to look at the Georgia Alabama thing for the SEC. So look, none of those teams are going to have one of those teams are going to have a loss, right? I think it's pretty safe to say, unless something crazy happens, Alabama and Georgia are going to meet back up in the SEC title game. That's the way it's looking. So yeah, that's tight.
I don't think
ACC,
this year.
Clemson. Right now,
So
Clemson. Right
go
now,
on.
Clemson is kind of. I think now that Clemson's gone past North Carolina State, and they beat North Carolina State and they beat Wake Forest. I think Clemson's pretty much going to march to winning the ACC now. And I don't think Clemson is that good this year compared to previous Clemson teams. But look, they're still going to be undefeated, so you got to take Clemson. That's tough. Yeah,
So you
someone's
so
going to
for
get gypped this year.
so based on that, you've got so we are Ohio State. We've established that they would be 13-0 in this scenario.
Yeah,
Clemson, even though they're it is what it is. They may not be great, but if they're
yeah,
ACC great,
yeah.
there, and then you're talking what one of the SEC teams,
Two,
Georgia, Bama. Let's say Georgia.
two.
That's three. You think two? Here's why I think
Here's what
possibly not is those two is last year both of them looked well, let's say this. Georgia looked dominant from start to finish until the SEC championship game, right? Alabama was iffy. Obviously they had the loss, but Alabama won that SEC championship game. If it ends up let's say it's reversed. Let's say Georgia gets there with one loss already and Alabama wins the game. Obviously then I Georgia would be out with two losses, but I just don't think they both have looked runaway good where you just say, "Oh yeah, absolutely."
But
The
no one
both of these.
has. No one
Well,
has.
but
Like,
that's the point. But still, like that. But that's my point. Like, you know what I mean? For Georgia last year, they lost the last week of the season in the SEC championship, but they looked so dominant the rest of the season. It was like, no, they absolutely got to be in. Whereas I don't feel that way now. You know what I mean? That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah, this is where people are going to be like, man, if things continue the way it's going, this may be one of those years people are like, we really need that expansion now. Like, we can't wait because, I mean, if you picture a scenario where, let's say USC wins out, I don't think that would happen, but USC wins out, Clemson, Ohio State, and let's say Georgia. And that would mean that the teams that don't make it will be, let's say in this scenario, a one-loss Alabama team, a one-loss Michigan team, and maybe, well, yeah, I'll just leave that there. I mean, that's tough. That'll be a tough thing to happen. Where it's like, man, those other two teams that don't get in, they're pretty good.
Yeah. Mark, what's going on? We are talking about Ed Rogers posed that scenario here. Should an 11-1 Michigan team make the playoffs along with a 13-0 Ohio team? And we're going through kind of potential scenarios. Two things that I mentioned, and I'll do it quickly, is number one, I think what could hurt Michigan, and not necessarily to keep them out, but what is definitely going to hurt them is their out of conference schedule. That regardless, even if Michigan gets in, that still is going to be a maybe a dirt spot, a tiny dirt spot on their resume. And the other for me was I did not think USC would be here where they are now. They are, definitely ahead of schedule, and I think they have a really good shot of getting to the Pac-12 championship. And if they are a one-loss conference champ, I think USC would get the nod. Now, it may not come down to, either Michigan or USC, but if we also talked about, obviously in this scenario, Ohio State's going to be in 13-0. Clemson at this point is undefeated with wins already over Wake and NC State, which are probably their toughest games. That's a second spot there. And then if USC is one loss or undefeated champ, that's going to be 3. And then now what comes down to is, potentially a 2-loss champ, which I don't think will happen, but is now a bunch of 1-loss teams and pitting those resumes against each other, where that's where, if you say a team like Utah, well, let's say Utah had, well, I guess at that point they would have to have 2 losses, but just a team that has a strong out of conference win, but now all of the semantics essentially start to come into play. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, those teams are going to have a strong non-conference win, unless it's Utah. If it's USC, it's Notre Dame. If it's Oklahoma State, they beat Arizona State, so that's nothing great, but it's much better than Michigan. So all those teams are going to have that over Michigan, and they're going to have a conference championship. So they're going to have an extra win, and it's going to be a conference championship.
That's tough. Yeah. Look,
or else they're not even going to be considered. Michigan would be considered over any non-conference champion unless it's Georgia or Alabama.
What about let's just for sake of discussion, what about a one-loss Ole Miss team? Let's say Ole Miss's only loss is Alabama, and I haven't looked at their schedule, so if they play Georgia, forgive me, but let's say an Ole Miss, is 11-1 pitted against Michigan's 11-1. I think that'd be it. I think that's going to be it. There's the possibility of Michigan not getting in, right? So I think, and this is interesting because this is something we talked about before the season started, was this exact scenario of that the out of conference potentially coming back to be an issue. Let's call it that.
Yeah, if you take Ole Miss, they didn't necessarily play anybody either. But again, compared to Michigan, they played Liberty, they played Georgia Tech, they played some teams with a pulse that have done decent work against other teams. So I don't think the committee's going to go crazy on that. I don't think that's going to weigh in Ole Miss's favor considerably, but I think it's a factor. And then start looking at those conference, the comparison of the two conferences, And, you got to think that that's going to lean the SEC's way as well.
True. At this point, let's see. For the teams who are ranked on Ole Miss's schedule, obviously they beat Kentucky Saturday. So Kentucky, and I don't know what ranking this is, but they're 13 on whatever I'm looking at. They also have LSU is ranked 25 at this point, which that's not going to happen. They won't be ranked. And then Mississippi State is 23, but they play them the last week of the season, which I would also venture out that they're not going to be ranked.
You're
and
knocking LSU and Mississippi State out of the rankings.
Yeah. And then they play Alabama. So it's interesting. I mean, based on what we just talked about, I wouldn't say Ole Miss has a great case to be in over, Michigan, but it, like you mentioned, I mean, Georgia Tech is a Power 5 team. So, that's who they played out of conference. I mean, they're not great, but kind of is what it is. It's definitely an interesting scenario to look at. I think, well, I guess this brings me to my next question is, so this is a potential scenario that could happen. So based on that, do you think any style point? I mean, I don't think Jim Harbaugh is going to make any changes or have this in mind at all, but you'd like to think that, putting it on the teams that you're playing in the next couple weeks will be something that is important. Also, obviously, developing your offense and defense and those things. But, this is definitely a scenario that could happen. Absolutely.
And the way things are developing in the Big Ten Western Division, even though that's right, we're canceling out a Big Ten championship game. The way things are going there, that's not going to be a great win for the Big Ten champion in terms of seeding, or if there's an unexpected loss here or there that they might be fighting to get into the playoff if they're facing number 23 Purdue or 8-4 Illinois in the Big Ten championship game.
Wow.
But, yeah,
sorry. I just that realization just hit me.
That's very real. I mean,
we saw what's in Northwestern 8-4 one year, and they was it 19, 20? I mean,
I'd be surprised if the Big Ten Western winners much better than 8-4. Maybe Minnesota could get there. Maybe.
I wonder who Illinois got on there. I mean, I would imagine most of them play each other, but I would imagine. I wonder if Illinois is favored against Iowa. I would think that they are.
4.
Okay. I mean, shoot, if Illinois wins, they lost to Indiana.
But what's interesting? That guys, we do national platforms do and all that stuff, like the conversation about what if this team has one loss versus this team having one loss, and it seems to always work itself out more times than not. Like somebody drops the ball who's having a great season and they essentially screw themselves, right? It's rare where we get to the playoff. We're like, what, that team really deserved to be in. It's rare. It's always ironic.
I don't know, man. We get some 5 seed. I mean, the COVID year, Texas A&M was 5. It was 9-1. They had a 1 loss.
We're not counting COVID year. We're not counting COVID.
Why?
I can only think of one year where it was pretty clear cut.
What year was that? First year?
No, the first year you had a bunch of 1-loss teams, and you had to leave 2 out that tied for a conference championship, TCU and Baylor.
Oh, that's right.
The next year I thought was pretty clear cut. Alabama, Clemson, Michigan State, Oklahoma. But 2016, you had an Ohio State, Penn State. One of them won head-to-head in the Big Ten Championship versus the better schedule and the better record. 2017, you had Alabama and Ohio State were on the 4-5 line. Do you go with the better record or the conference championship? On down the line. 2018, Oklahoma and Ohio State both went 13-1. One of them got left out. You had the whole argument, bad loss versus better wins. Ohio State had better wins, but they had the horrible loss. 2019, I know this is not a controversy, and they got it right, and they had the right teams in, but that was 2019 was LSU, Ohio State, Clemson are all undefeated. And then Oklahoma, they earned it. They had 1 loss. They were the Big 12 champion. But I told people, if you want the 4 best teams, if the committee, many times they make this statement about we're selecting the 4 best teams. And I really don't think they should be selecting who they think are the 4 best teams. I think they should be selecting the 4 teams that earned it. But in 2019, the 4th best team was Alabama. I don't care what happened. They were a lot better than Oklahoma. They're not going to give up 49 points in the first half to LSU. They were one of the 4 best teams in the country. It wasn't Oklahoma. Yeah. So,
but if I'm not mistaken, Tua was hurt at that point, right? So I mean, that's maybe that had a effect in terms of their decision.
I think no, because Alabama had 2 losses at that point, if I'm not mistaken.
They weren't.
Yeah. I think a healthy Tua. I honestly, as much as I root for Alabama, I think a healthy Tua. I think Alabama probably still would have lost to that LSU team. Like they were just
no one was beating the LSU team that year. I mean,
they were on another level. They did did really well.
If Ohio State would have got a shot, I would have loved to have seen it, but that
would have been interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
So I am kind of hearing Mark go through that. I'm interested in kind of Ed's scenario flipped. So if Ohio State is the team that has the, if Michigan wins out, they're 13-0. Obviously they're in. Now Ohio State, I think they've got the Notre Dame win is out of conference. I don't know. I mean, then you start to look at, I feel like everybody looks at that Notre Dame win a lot different than we did on September 4th, the day after.
The Notre Dame win still, to me, weighs heavier than it. And granted, this is an off year for Notre Dame, clearly, but just from a brand standpoint, and I don't think they haven't totally fallen off the face of the earth. That win still, I think, outweighs any win Michigan has had thus far.
But at that point, you're not weighing it against Michigan. You're weighing it against the other USC or the other, one-loss teams trying to get in now. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
you know what I mean? Like it's, I don't even know what. I can pull up the rankings to see kind of the one-loss or undefeated teams. Who knows? Tennessee. What if Tennessee only has 1 loss and it's Alabama, right? Like, how does that look? Who knows? Yeah. It'll be interesting. I'm not sold that it's going to work itself out.
Also like dictates a lot of times it's like the head-to-head matchups too. Like, how does the Ohio State Michigan game look? Is it a last minute field goal or overtime? Is it like 2016 goes to a double overtime and it's a bomb burner from the beginning to the end, and that's where it's like, okay, wow, these teams are literally evenly matched. They have pretty much an identical season. They both deserve to be in, I think, but, if it's like 2018 and they both meet with high rankings and aspirations and have really good seasons, but, one team just smacks the other and drops 60 points on them, then that's going to weigh heavily. So I think that also, matters. It's like these head-to-head matchups and how these teams do against each other,
Yeah, that definitely comes into play.
Say Oregon, let's say Oregon, case in point. Well, if Oregon, wins out, and they win the Pac-12, right? And Georgia loses the game. Well, I'm pretty sure the committee's going to weigh the Oregon-Georgia game, the first game of the year.
That would be fascinating. Oregon wins the conference championship. They're 12-1. Georgia goes, what are we going in this? Let's say they lose to Tennessee and they don't even go to the SEC championship game, but they're 11-1, and they completely annihilated them. But that was a long, that's another thing. Does this go through the committee's mind? Because you guys are NCAA tournament guys. That committee's more looking at, we don't care what that team was in November. Sure, right. Those are wins and losses on the resume. They count, right. But we're looking for if we got to make a decision, who's the better team right now?
Right.
And
absolutely.
Oregon, Georgia, I don't think any reasonable person thinks there's 46 points difference between those two teams. But that's what happened when they played.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. No, and those things can happen. You're like, well, hold on a second. Like that was the first game of the year, but it was so one-sided where it's like, man, like, can we really like put in this Oregon team over this Georgia team after what they did to them head to head, neutral field? You know, like that's where it does get interesting. You know.
It'll be interesting. It's actually kind of exciting, like just talking through these scenarios to see what would happen. Gosh, I look at like a team like BYU. They're ranked 16 right now. I think what did they? They're 3-1. So, man, these ads are the worst. So, I mean, I wonder if a BYU wins out, what would happen
Okay.
there?
All right. Good night.
they
Good night.
finished
Good
their
night.
season.
Good night, Desmond. Go back into your hole.
Yeah,
Go,
BYU, they're done.
get out the
They might
wormhole.
be, but they
No,
also might not
no,
be.
They lost to
no,
Oregon by like 3 touchdowns.
no,
They're,
dude. Put this.
they're
This is essentially, I think, a 7-18 race against the playoff. You know, and that's it. You know, and what's going to happen, guys? I know, like, it's going to shake out. Someone's going to drop the ball. Hopefully, it's not Michigan versus Indiana Saturday.
No,
Since-
hold
since
on.
that-
Wait a
since you
minute.
called-
Hold
since
on. No,
since you
no,
called it a
no.
trap game, since you called it a trap game, you know, someone's going to. It always happens. Somebody's going
And
to.
you
drop the
just
ball.
told me like, oh, there's absolutely no way that would
I
ever
said
happen.
hopefully-
And now,
I said hopefully it doesn't. Like,
oh
I'm
my
just saying, like,
gosh.
I was trying not to jinx them by saying someone's going to drop the ball. Like, someone is. Like, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. Like, someone's going to fall out this thing. You know, especially when these really good teams play each other, right? So look, every year we are, especially when,
each other. Somebody's
Well, yeah,
going
I'm
to
just
lose the game.
right. I'm just saying, like, so we have these years, you know, when Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, even MSU are both good. Like last year, right? And there's a certain point in the season where all 4 of those teams seem to be like a legitimate running to win the Big Ten at some point in the season, midway through or whatever it was. And you start having this conversation, and you know what happens? They play head to head, one beats the other, and it always shakes out. So, I mean, and then, like, and I think the great thing about you don't have the posers like Notre Dame being in the mix. They're out the way. You don't have to worry about them.
Shots
You don't have
fired.
You don't have to worry about a non-power 5 team getting in the mix, like, you know, Cincinnati and all that. Like, you know, they're off the way, right? It's all about the big boys right now. And, you know, I'm just not too worried about it. I'm really not.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. Let me see. Gosh, is this not updated? Because this shows Kentucky undefeated. I think it'd be fascinating. I don't think it's going to be clear cut. I think with, like Mark said, most years there's an argument for number 5 to be in over 4, and I don't think this year will be any different. And I just think because Antoine mentions a couple times about, you know, Michigan playing cupcakes, that everybody does it, and I agree with the premise. But the tough part is you don't have any Power 5 schools in your out of conference. Like, you want to play 1 or even 2 cupcakes, that's fine, but you gotta have somebody with like even a Georgia Tech, like, it, you know, in the out of conference where you've got at least something to kind of hang your hat on. I don't think Michigan's out of conference is going to be able to get up against anybody's.
You got people pimping Maryland as like some kind of legitimate team. You know, it's like, stop it. Like, they're okay. They are not some contender. They are better than they used to be for sure. But like, let's stop this with this whole Maryland love. MSU sucks. Okay, it's just like, guys, you have to pimp up our wins. We don't have a great win right now, and that's okay because Michigan is taking care of their business. But it's okay to acknowledge, you know what, they really haven't played anybody who's really good this year. That's just it. But they will. Penn State's going to be one. Ohio State's definitely going to be one. But as of now, we haven't really beat anybody legitimate.